actually, when he's here, is doubtful because he also works from Brookline.
I am here. Hello.
Hey, Jim.
Hi, everybody. Hey, Bernie. Bernie, I'm going to make you a co-host. So
Yes.
if you're feeling like you need to mute somebody, now you can.
Actually, when he's here, is doubtful because.
That.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Bernie.
Hi.
Hi. Oh, and here's Sidra.
Hello.
Hi.
Jim.
Hello, Marcia.
Hi, Jim. Rabbi Jim.
Nice to see you. Or nice to see your little, your little, phone symbol.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Elizabeth is
Hi,
here.
Judith.
Hello, Florence.
Hey, Sidra. Hi. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Sidra.
Nice to see you, Peter. Nice to see your face.
Is Bernie frozen?
Here, yeah.
No, I don't think
Hey,
Bernie.
and Jim, yes.
Bernie seems to be, sort of moving back and forth in his chair at least. So.
Oh, no,
I'm
he's
here.
okay.
I'm here.
It's fine.
I think he was frozen for a while.
And then our here.
You'd think he was here if he were frozen.
Judith is here, which is great. Hello, Judith.
Hi, how are you?
And I guess that's Irv behind Rami's.
Hey, Irv.
Okay, that's great.
Hello.
Hi, Bernie.
Boy, I haven't seen, it's amazing.
I need to
This year is just.
Before we get started, okay? Just so give me a moment and I will be right with you.
You can mute.
Yeah.
Mute it.
Hi,
Look
Buzz.
who's on. Fuzzy's on. Tamar, we were just talking about you.
You were? What were you saying?
I was saying how terrific you are.
Oh, Judith, hi. Here, I'll put the
see you.
video on, even though I'm just woke up.
There you are.
Hi. Oh, it's so good to see you.
Great to see you. What a fabulous podcast.
Oh, thank you.
So moving and
Oh, Tamar.
incredibly perceptive.
Are you talking about it all together or the most recent one?
Well, all of them, but the most recent one especially was also more personal.
Yeah, I'll say.
As personal as it could get, as intimate as it could get.
Pretty much. When I think about how many, I mean, this is, I'm grateful to have listeners, but how many thousands of people have now heard me give birth. But
Well, we wanted to see if you could send us the link to the podcast.
oh, sure. Yeah, I'll put it
Love
in the
it.
chat.
Trudy. Hi,
wonderful.
Trude. Hi.
Trudy, are you schmoozing, Trudy? Here you are, schmoozing.
I'm here.
And there's Cindy. Hi, Cindy.
Hi, Cindy.
Oh, hi. Hi, everybody. Look at all those people.
Hi. David Guberman, nice to see you.
Great to see you.
Oh, David, hi.
Yeah, hi, David.
Just twice in a week.
Now, what time is it there in Jerusalem? There was a lot of talk about the time difference and everything.
7 hours.
7 hours. So what time is it now there? Let's see.
We're in Jerusalem.
Yeah, what time is it there for you?
It's 5 o'clock.
5 o'clock.
Cindy, are you at Carlton's?
Can you hear me?
Can't hear you. You're muted. Can't hear you.
No, we can hear you.
We can't hear you, Cindy.
Can't hear you, Cindy.
She's not muted, so there must be an issue with the microphone.
I think she's using an earpiece, which is a problem.
I hope she's not using a couple of tin cans and a string.
Cindy, maybe with
Hi there.
beloved 94-year-old friend.
Used to do that when I was a kid. Tin can, string, and words.
There we go. Hi, you guys. Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me now?
Where are you?
I'm at Carlton's and he's sleeping right now, but I'm here. And so is Jeff. So
Hey, Jeff.
so we're going to be joining you, and when he wakes up, he's going to come on into the room too. Okay. But so it's great to be with you guys. Bernie, thanks for this invitation.
Julie. Hi, Julie.
Hi. Hi.
Oh, Shuli. Hi, Shuli. Shuli's around the block.
This is truly a global convocation.
Yes, it is.
You can you can.
Alex, wow.
Oh, hi, Alex.
I saw Harvey there.
Hi,
Hello,
all.
Peter.
Good to see you. Love the
Hey,
message.
Peter, can you hear me?
Oh, good. Good.
Peter,
Yeah,
this is Marty. Can you hear me?
I filled in a lot of details.
Maybe when it starts.
Yeah, we can hear
Yeah,
you,
hi, Marty.
Marty.
We see you.
When he starts his spiel, I could do.
All right, so I'm going to turn it over to, I'm going to welcome everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Jim Morgan. I'm the rabbi for the Worship and Study Minyan, and very happy to turn the proceedings over to our education guru, Sherry Leffert, who is a co-host along with Bernie. So don't blame me if you get muted. It was probably Sherry and not me.
Well, so I'm just thrilled that Bernie is here today, all the way from Jerusalem, and I'd like to welcome you all. This is a very special event, and I'm supposed to introduce Bernie, who needs no introduction. He's a longtime friend and member of the Worship and Study Minyan, and he gave us this quick little bio of him. Bernie Avishai teaches political economy at Dartmouth and Hebrew University. He is the author of The Tragedy of Zionism, among other books, and writes regularly for The New Yorker. But I checked him out on Wikipedia, and if you have a little patience, I'm going to read the long one and just sort of...
No, don't.
Don't read the long one?
Else.
All right.
Everybody here knows everybody knows me here.
All right.
Everybody here is a friend.
Well, then let's just get started. Go ahead.
Schmoozing is just for friends anyway. So,
Bernie, everybody should be muted except you. And the host has to do that, I understand. So.
Yeah, all right. I will do it. Do you hear background noises or anything?
We're not muted yet.
Well,
we're not muted yet.
I'll get to you. You just, everybody's muted here except for Marcia. Unless there are more people here than I can see, which
everybody seems muted more or less.
Yeah.
I just muted everyone but Sherry and Bernie.
Sounds good.
I like having this power. It's a superpower for just muting everybody. Anyway, so it's really great to be here, clearly, seeing all my friends. The thing I want to talk about today is all very familiar to you. The part of the Passover Haggadah that always fascinated me were the four sons. The four sons come just after the leader of the Seder speaks of the story of the Exodus from Egypt, the giving of the Torah, and the proposition is that we have these four sons that expose in some way the rabbinic imagination, because what's happening is that these four questioning sons are each revealing a different psychological state. And what's as interesting as the questions they ask is the way that they are answered, because in some sense, rabbinic imagination, and I understand what a wildly generalized idea that is, but rabbinic imagination seems to be revealed in the various ways that the sons are answered. So you have four sons who are actually it's interestingly put, Keneged arba banim dibra Torah, and it says the Torah teaches of 4 sons, but actually it sounds more like, if this were the Torah teaches of 4 sons, you might say something like Dibra Torah al arba banim, but it's Keneged arba banim, which seems to imply a sense of engagement, that the Torah is revealed in engagement with these 4 sons. And what are the 4 sons say? You have the wise, you have the evil, you have the one who, the simpleton, and the one who doesn't know how to ask. And then you have these various answers. I won't go through them. They're all very familiar, and I'll go through them serially, but not all at once in the beginning. We suppose that what's happening here, or so the rabbis are implying, is that the Torah, the divine authority, is somehow cascading down into ordinary wisdom, that the law properly applied is also psychologically subtle. And then our attitude towards the law reveals these psychological types. And the psychological types, in my view, also have a kind of political implication. That's what we're going to deal with today. Who are these 4 sons? What do they ask? How do they ask it? How are they answered? And in what sense is the answer implying something about politics? Now, I have to admit, when I was a child, I thought I understood what this was all about. It was very clear to me. You had to understand what the wise son asks and be like the wise son. You had to understand what the evil son asks and distance oneself from the evil son. And, you know, the one who is simple and the one who doesn't know how to ask, well, they never would have made it to Talmud Torah anyway. So they're sort of not, you know, it's like a mopping up operation. Once you get past the wise and the evil, you have this mopping up operation of these other 2. Let's just say I don't think of this quite the same way anymore. So what is the wise son? Start with the wise son. What are the testimonies and laws, statutes of the Lord our God commanded us? You shall teach them the laws of Passover. And the first thing that is said, one may not follow the Paschal offering. And it says here with entertainment, that's actually not a proper translation. What it means is that you mustn't eat anything after anything after the last taste at the Seder table, the afikoman, which is not exactly dessert. It's sort of the last thing that's ritually expected to be consumed. And that is Rashi, according to Rashi, let me get this right. According to Rashi, here, oops, what did I just hit? Sorry, share screen. According to Rashi, what you're really expected to do is not have anything in your mouth to complicate the taste of the Seder, which is so powerful and poignant and important to you that you mustn't in some way get in the way of that taste lingering in your mouth and presumably the wisdom implied by the taste and its symbolic importance. I find it interesting, by the way, that the first commandment in this little part of the Haggadah is something you're not allowed to do, which is, Sidney Morgenbesser used to say, the philosopher at Columbia, famous philosopher at Columbia, Sidney used to say that the philosopher's axiom is ought implies can. Anything that you say ought to be done, you should be able to do. Ought implies can, but the Jewish version is can implies don't. And that's that's sort of like we get a taste here of all the different kinds of commandments we have. And the wise son, presumably, is wise because of the sense of obedience implied, the sense of oneness with the law. And that was the thing actually that impressed me so much when I was in Talmud Torah. Like, I was going to be a good boy. That was the thing you were supposed to aspire to, which is to identify with the oneness of God, identify with the authority of God, identify with the authority of rabbinic interpretation of God's divine commandments, and that that meant identifying with all of the restrictions that was implied by Torah study. I have to say that as I grew, I became less and less impressed with the wisdom of this. I remember being struck when I read Varieties of Religious Experience by William James. I remember being struck by the way in which healthy-mindedness was described in Varieties of Religious Experience. Healthy-mindedness was the religious experience of people who see themselves in union with the divine, and who, when they see people who seem to be psychologically at sixes and sevens, when things are wrong with them, how do you put them right according to the healthy-minded? You put them right by telling them that the authority of God is basically not to be doubted, that if you can commune with the authority of God, you are awakening to your real being. And by awakening to your real being, you find consolation. Who are such people? I mean, to what extent can we assume that there is consolation and a sense of a sense of comfort in this conception of surrender to what can only be called orthodoxy? William James was not powerfully attracted to the healthy-minded. He used the phrase healthy-minded in an ironic sense, which I must say I've more or less appropriated. I think of the wise son as something like, you know, the people who, when you are thinking about political affairs, have a sense of spiritual well-being, which does not necessarily feel well-earned. I've always been struck by the degree to which, this is a Pew poll, the people who have a sense of spiritual well-being, and by the way, this is a sense of spiritual well-being that also becomes a source of guidance for right and wrong. It's more or less the same proportion of the population. People who have this sense of spiritual well-being, who are constantly sort of identified with and feel this great sense of affiliation to spiritual community, tend not to be the most highly educated people in society. 40% of such people are high school or less. Only 10% are people with postgraduate degrees. So I think, like, how come the wise son is identified with people who actually seem most susceptible to being drawn to a conception of spirituality which is orthodox. That is where you feel you are in a kind of sense of communion with rabbinic authority. So that got me thinking, like, what then is, to be made of the evil son, the wicked son? When we originally used to read this, it was very clear that the wicked son was wicked because he rejected that sense of communion. The wicked son was wicked because, and it says right here, because he says, you, what is this service to you? And thereby puts himself outside the community. And what we were told when I was a kid was, hake et shinav, which means, smack out his teeth. But I once had a teacher who told me, what it means is you're supposed to smack out from rasha. Hake et shinav means take out the shin in rashab, and what's left is ra. What's left is bad, evil. Like there's something deeply evil about somebody who puts himself outside the community. Now, over the years in worship and study, we've always had a kind of pleasant way of describing this. I'm thinking of Hillary now, and there's a way in which we may have believed that what makes you evil is that you're not sufficiently identified. There isn't enough human solidarity in you to attribute dignity to everybody, that somehow you see yourself as sort of coldly isolated from the rest of humanity. And that was the thing that's wrong with such a person. You're putting yourself outside the community. That means somehow you're incapable of the compassion, or as Sidra likes to say, the capaciousness that allows you to have a moral imagination, et cetera, which I'm prepared to assume is like the best possible way of spinning this. But what he really says is, what is this service to you? That's what he says, which is another way of saying, look, I'm an individual. This must be meaningful to you. Could you please explain this to me? Like, what is this to you? And it's not clear at all that he's doing anything more than individuating himself. He's not saying he's outside the community. He's just asking what this is to you, implying that there's a me. And that, to me, is not just not morally or ethically evil, but it may be even the beginning, at least for William James, it is the beginning of a kind of religious wisdom. And to put this a little more in context, after his chapter on the healthy-minded, as I say, which he's using ironically, he speaks of the sick soul, of a person who feels inwardly vile and wrong and standing in false relation to the author of one's being and appointer of one's spiritual fate. In other words, a person who somehow comes to an understanding of his own poignant isolation, that he goes down to the grave himself, that he is a person born into a consciousness that is idiosyncratic. And it's the beginning of, for William James, genuine religious wisdom, because it's the beginning of that which introduces to you a need for a transcendental faith. when you think about this also in political terms, it hardly seems true to me that this person is evil. It actually seems to me that, for example, when you read Mill's On Liberty, that people who argue against that nonconformist individuation are really making an assumption of their own infallibility. And as Mill says, you know, just as as you wouldn't have one oppressing the majority, you wouldn't have the majority oppressing the one, that there's something fundamentally liberal and something fundamentally emancipating about asking a question like, what is this to you? It is true that such a person is putting themselves outside of the community, but that's the only way you ever get any kind of innovation. And it's not at all clear to me that the orthodox conception of communion is really something to be admired or to be emulated. I mean, I could go on about this, but I see that I've already gone 25 minutes, or 20 minutes. So I don't want to, I want to leave time for schmoozing. I just want to be clear that I think the son who's represented as bad with relation to Torah seems to me actually not just not bad, but necessary to any community. And it's what seems to me more bad is the way he was answered. The idea that you answer him with a repressive violence because he, quote unquote, puts himself outside the community. So right now we have a bit of a reversal. The wise son seems to me something of an orthodox, how shall I put this? An orthodox naive. The evil son seems to me a necessary driver of innovation and creativity, and not at all someone in any event who should be answered the way the rabbinic voice seems to be answering. So let's go back then to the next step. Then you get to Tam and She'eno Yodea Lishol, what the simple-minded one and the one who doesn't know how to ask. I must tell you, for the longest time, I never really understood the difference. And I'm not sure there really is a significant difference, except that I tend to think of the one who doesn't know how to ask as the child who is still capable of intellectual growth. So someone who is, you know, in their teens, or somebody who's still young enough and supple enough, and somebody who is, for whatever reason, understood to have sufficient capability of growth. And I think here on the rabbis, and with both of them, answering in really interesting and intelligent ways. The one who doesn't know how to ask, you should just open the discussion with him. You know, petachlo, open the conversation. Have a schmooze with him. Have a schmooze and learn with him, and allow him to be introduced to the kind of opportunity for critical thinking that will allow him to grow. I would say introduce him to the evil son, but if he doesn't know how to ask, I suspect he'll gravitate to the evil son. But the more interesting, one for me I've come to understand over the years, and probably the most interesting for anybody interested in democratic politics, is Tom, the simple-minded son. And let's say the simple-minded son is not somebody who's inherently stupid, but somebody who, for whatever reason, has kind of sunk into whatever oversimplified conceptions of life he has, and he or she has fallen into, has become emotionally or intellectually lazy, is simply not willing to be moved out of the groove of their lives. 10 years past puberty, you're not generally going to be as supple as you were 2 or 3 years before. And so the question is, what do you do with such people? People who are simply feeling insecure, people who are not really trusting themselves to understand all of the things that you have to understand in order to be personally sovereign. What do you do with such people? And the rabbis are kind of shrewd about it, and I think very self-revealing about it. They say, tell them God's really strong. God is a strong man. What do you tell? You just say to him, a strong hand, God brought us out of Egypt. By the way, most of the Haggadah seems to be written for the simple son, because the whole Exodus story, with all of its subtlety and all of its twists and turns, does not exist in the Haggadah. And the story that you're supposed to tell your children, as the Haggadah describes it, mentions Moses once and only as an obedient servant. And almost the entire story of the Exodus in the Haggadah is basically of God's strong loyalty to the Jewish people, or the people of the children of Israel, God's loyalty and strength, and God took the children of Israel out with the Yad Chazakah B'Zroa Netuyah, the strong hand and outstretched arm. And the whole subtlety of the story is gone. The contradictions of the story are gone. And you have really almost a kind of Pravda-like conception of what the great leader is doing for his people. So for what people does this look, how shall I put it, interesting? Well, for 40–50% of people in any democracy, you tend to have a need for a strong leader. Without belaboring the point, I think this is all pretty clear. The people who are least able to think critically for themselves tend to have voted for what they consider to be a strong man. And I also don't have to tell you what you already know, which is that that strong man has never stopped using that trope.
Massive guy, this big, powerful guy. This guy he is a monster, a giant of a man, one really large person. I've seen a lot of people over the years, big people. I have a friend, Big guy, one of the biggest in the world. This big, strong friend of mine who weighed like 250 then, which 250 then.
Anyway, I mean, I don't want to belabor it, and I also want to get him off the screen. But, you know, I don't know how many times the word strong is used by that person, but clearly he presumes that there are going to be a lot of people out there who will fall for the idea because of their own insecurities and their own simple-mindedness, are going to fall for the idea that, hey, I'll think for you. I'll think for you. You know, the reason why we're having this problem with that country is because, you know, the reason why we're having this problem with that country is because 5 years ago we weren't strong enough with them. Or the reason why we have economic problems in this country is because we don't have a strong leader who shows confidence, because as long as you have confidence in an economy, that's all you need to have a strong economy. It's a kind of natural default for a conception of leadership, which assumes that it has to appeal to a lot of other people who simply don't have the confidence to think critically. So here is my sort of summary. I think the wise son is an understandable type, somebody who imagines himself, you know, going to an Ivy League school and getting his life in order and maybe joining the elite himself someday, but basically doing it by climbing the ladder of the orthodoxy that's presented him. Let's call him the elite son. The evil son, on the other hand, feels to me like somebody who is getting a bum rap and always gets a bum rap. The person who calls out the deficiencies of an orthodoxy, but who first and foremost has to recognize, and often with the sickness of a soul, recognize his individuality, the importance of that, the poignancy of it, and the problem this creates, the sadness and sense of isolation that this presupposes, and nevertheless is the person that liberalism is supposed to protect. Then you have the sort of naive person who you want to invite into education, invite into critical engagement. And finally, you have the simple son who is, alas, impressed by power and tends to be a very large proportion of any society, even a democratic society like our own, and is dangerously answered by appealing to power, and not always the power of the one God, sometimes just the power of the one Khan. So I'll leave it at that, and now we can schmooze.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, it's just wonderful and a great midrash, and really a lot of food for thought. And I'm sure there'll be some questions and comments. So let's see.
Yeah, I'm going to ask everyone, please, to raise your hand electronically The way that my screen works is that if you are waving at me with your actual hand, there's a good chance I won't see it and you'll be ignored, which I don't mean to do. I try not to be just that ignores his guests. But please do raise your hand electronic. If you have trouble doing it, feel free to wave at me energetically. I can't promise that I'll see you. Okay, great. So Jim Leffert was the one who raised his hand first.
See, raise hand.
I was very impressed and fed nourished by your thinking. And I just wanted to mention that when you talked about the simple son and his attraction to a leader who projects strength, that it reminded me that when I was in Paris in 1968, right after the uprising, the leftist student uprising there, they had a poster up there of a caricature of de Gaulle, and it said, "Votez pour moi, je fais le reste." So I was just reminded of that. So I thought I'd mention that.
Thank you. Okay, David Gurin is next.
Yes, I also want to thank you, Bernie, for a provocative and compelling presentation. I do want to raise a question, however, about your characterization of the evil son, because I think there's a possibility that you omitted, which is consistent both with his individuating himself, which is laudable, but also with adopting, if not a violently repressive approach to him, nevertheless a critical one, and that's the question of solidarity. One can be an individual and feel part of a community and in solidarity with it, even in solidarity with one's fellow citizens with whom one has very sharp disagreements, or one can individuate and reject the community. And I think that it's not clear, to me at least, why you don't consider, or if you considered it, why you reject that possible view of the evil son.
Well, I didn't reject it. I raised Hillary's yearly defense of the way he's answered.
This isn't a defense of how he's answered, because it's not appropriate of an answer. It's a question of what kind of person is.
Right, but I think what Hillary was implying is that you're presuming that when he asks the question, he has no sense of human solidarity. And that's why, you know, if you don't have a sense of solidarity with humanity, if you don't have a sense of compassion for the dignity of others, etc., if you put yourself outside that way, then you should be answered very strongly. But you know, the plain text doesn't imply that. It doesn't deny it. It just doesn't imply it. All he's asking is, what is this to you? And given the way the wise son was answered, which is teach him all the things he's supposed to do, given the way the wise son is answered, the answer to the evil son or the wicked son seems to be the opposite of that, which is this person is not accepting the things he's supposed to do. And that's what's putting him outside the community. I'm raising another possibility, which is that he's individuating. He's seriously asking, what is this to you? Hoping that if he gets an interesting answer, he'll have a sense of solidarity with the people giving him that answer, but is not simply identifying obediently to the world of orthodox prescriptions which the wise son accepts, it seems, uncritically. I think that the wicked son is doing sort of what we have to do with our children at the Seder, which is make our tradition beautiful enough, self-critical enough, whatever, so that that sense of solidarity will not be simply imposed, which is a mug's game anyway, but creates a sense of solidarity because you're giving the other a chance to be both individuated and critical, but is also going to be drawn in and attracted to the, not just to the answer, but to the process of allowing that kind of individuation. For me, the wicked son is also, as I said before, I think individuation is not a selfish thing. It can be an extremely sad and lonely thing. And the sickness of the soul, as James describes it, is a great burden. But it's the beginning of maturity. And also the beginning of a mature religious imagination in James's view. And I have to say that's what attracts me. That conception of individuation attracts me. Anyway, I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you. So Irv, please unmute yourself and you can ask your question.
So, Bernie, I think in your introduction to this wonderful discussion, you seem to imply that this episode of The Four Sons is a kind of a teaching lesson of the rabbis. And in that context, I wonder whether your reading of this, as well as other passages in Mishnah or Talmud, would persuade you that this wonderful interpretation of the Rasha, which I very much appreciate, was reflected any of the voices among the Rabbanim, among the sages. And it seems as though the answer to the Rasha is pretty harsh. And I wonder whether you think that you have some predecessors in this interpretation of what is meant to be the teaching lesson of the second son.
Well, I'll leave that to Jim Morgan and other people who know the Talmud better than I do. I looked at 10 different explanations for why the afikomen is supposed to be the last thing you taste. And one or two of these, I mean, Google's a wonderful thing, you know. One or two of the things that, one or two of the rabbis said, oh, that wise son, he thinks he's such a hot shot. And I sure, there are going to be rabbis who look at it from all sides, but I think that, you see, the thing is that can be a little bit deceptive, because yes, it's true that the various Rabbanim will have different views of this, and we can say from that, in that sense, that there's something pluralistic. But the rabbis are also a closed shop. I mean, they there are ways in which you gain authority to have an opinion. And, you know, when it came to Spinoza, they were all like pretty sure what to do. So, you know, I think of Spinoza sort of as the wicked son, and the way in which he was treated as being sort of the solidarity that I expect from rabbis, in spite of their various opinions about all kinds of things. You know, there's a much bigger question here that I really can't pretend to answer any better than the question that you raised, because obviously you're raising it rhetorically and provocatively, and I know how you feel about it, and you know how I feel about it. So, but I guess I do feel that rabbinic pluralism is not the same thing as pluralism that would satisfy me.
I think that's fair. Shmuel, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Bernie.
Hi.
First of all, I want to thank you to once again doing what you did very effectively some 40 years ago in The Tragedy of Zionism, which reshaped my opinion on the story that I was fed when I was growing up in Israel and in school. So this time you fed into something I was troubled about, and that's the Seder and the Haggadah. And so by way of disclosure, I'm a devout atheist, so I had two problems with the Haggadah and the Seder that we were celebrating, as many other families here in the exile. For many years. And the two problems, first of all, it's an overtly racist document. So we had two of our children married to non-Jews. And how can I say, I cannot say that. And secondly, on a more deeper level, there's a problem with, as an atheist, how can I thank God I don't believe in for something that didn't happen? So, and like there is a solid evidence that the whole story of Exodus never happened, but still always existed. So, and that's the background. Now about the sons, now that you shed light, and I joined the meeting a little bit late, so I missed the wise son, but I got to the part that was important to me, and that's the wicked son. I really like this guy. And the point is that, to me, he's a psychotherapist. He's asking the question, what is it to you? Tell me how you feel about it. So I imagine a therapy session where the wicked son is the therapist and the Tam, the simple guy, is the client, the patient. And that's the way it goes. So I even more strongly gravitate to the wicked son and the response of the establishment saying you shouldn't ask this kind of question. Don't go into this therapy. Just vote Trump, vote Netanyahu, vote whatever the strong guy is at any moment. Now, what jumps at me is that I have a good friend who used to be, he converted to Judaism many, many years ago. He was a successful lawyer. And like 10, 12 years ago, he had a massive heart attack and saw the light and decided to be a rabbi. And he became a rabbi. He's a rabbi. And when we asked him in a friendly fashion, why did you switch? And he said, I was educated in a Catholic family. In a Catholic family, when I asked difficult questions, the answer was, you shouldn't ask this question. And that's why I converted to Judaism.
Welcome.
So that's how the circle is closed to me. And again, thank you very much, Bernie.
Okay. Why don't we take Peter and Tamar's questions in turn, because we're running out. I'd like them both to have a chance to ask.
And that's what I was going to suggest. That we're getting close to time. We're not quite there yet, but So Peter and Tamar, why don't you both, and now I see that Alex has raised his own hand. So why don't
Well,
we-
I'm not going anywhere. I can stay till 6:15, you know, to
Great.
12:15.
Jim, this is Marty. Put me on your list.
All right. So, well, why don't we have everyone? I think we now have 4 people in line, including Marty, who is. So let's take Peter and Tamar, and maybe do you want Bernie? Do you want all 4 at once, or do you want 2 and 2?
I'm fine as long as you're okay with the time.
Good. Let's take all 4 at once, and then we will let Bernie respond.
No, I actually think 2 and 2 would be.
2 and 2 is better. Great. Okay.
Yeah.
Peter and Tamar are our original questioners, so let's go with Peter and Tamar, and then if there's time, we'll go to Alex and Marty.
Well, thanks, Bernie. This is more than great. It's great always to listen and hear you, and haven't heard you, and also the writing you did on Israel and Palestinians. So that's another conversation. But the question I had really sets on who is actually asking this or the setting for this question. And it seems like there's this big burden, if you will, on the one who is leading the Seder and having to consider that he's what in France, he's the teacher, and the teacher is in France, they call them the sujet supposé savoir, someone who's supposed to know. And not necessarily in this case, and it feels like there's this enormous burden on this person to come up with a framework. And I'm not sure that the framework that was suggested or given by the rabbi is so inclusive that that these 4 people, and the number 4 seems to be, this structurally appealing way of dividing the universe. And what my question is, who has been left out? And I'm not sure that I even know, but I'm not sure that the teacher, the sujet supposé savoir, knows either.
Right. Actually, let me quickly say something about this before Tamar asks her question. I think there is a great burden on anyone who uses the Haggadah to do a Seder, and to open up many other voices. I think that's true, but I hope I'm not implying by this that I think we ought to ditch this like we ditched Dr. Seuss books. I think that there's something tremendously interesting about the Haggadah, and it's up to us to understand the context that produced the imagination that produced the text. That to me, it's, when you get to the rabbis saying, it wasn't 10 plagues, it was 50. No, it was not 50, it was like 250. And it's like, you can just hear the sense of desperation in the voice, the sort of desperate sense of a desire for retaliation. And I think that's more interesting than anything the person says. So when when I think of what Shmuel says, I can't teach this because it's racist. You don't have to teach it. The racism is sort of what's interesting. It's like to go back and to see how this text got produced. It's incumbent upon us to see this because it's a clue to the historical moment that produced the people that produced the text. And that's more interesting, and I think is a greater and more liberating, emancipating process than saying, oh, this text is what I should learn. That's a little like being the wise son thing. Like, you don't want to do that. You don't want to just accept it on its face. No text is sacred, not the Haggadah or the Torah. Anyway, sorry, Tamar. Buzzy.
Oh, thank you. No, I think you almost know what I'm going to say, but I appreciate this interpretation right now because I recognize for the first time, I think, how, in the past year or so, the value of feeling like you're part of a community, which is something that I don't think that I grew up with the same kind of religious imagination. I think a lot of people my age didn't, especially younger. And that the need for community is going to kind of sneak in. And if it's not through religion, it's going to be through something else. And giving permission, it's like for the first time, I'm finding myself a little bit on the outside of what I thought was my community. Because at this present moment, in particular in media and journalism, they're in academia, there is a streak of illiberalism that's moved into liberalism. And that has changed the discourse. It's changed the conversation. And, I spent yesterday was my day off from childcare, and I inadvertently spent it on Twitter watching journalists that I very much respect getting mobbed for not necessarily having the exact correct way of staying in the group. And, I don't need to go into too much more detail. I think you guys all know what I'm talking about. But what's interesting about the way that that's changing the conversation is that you have a whole lot more people who don't know how to ask and don't know how to engage in the conversation, because of fear that they are not going to be accepted by what the community has blindly accepted. And I don't want to say blindly, because I think that's too harsh, but I think that, I'm just recognizing my own relationship now with this interpretation of the wicked son, and recognizing that this hunger to be part of a community is not necessarily a sign of wisdom, but is a sign of humanity. Yeah. And that's, it's just interesting when you didn't question it before, and that was your connection to wisdom. And now the questioning it feels a little wiser. And it's also it's a lot lonelier. That's been, this interpretation just feels enormously timely right now.
Thank you, Tamar. Bernie, do you want to respond, or should we move on?
No, I think it speaks.
We'll talk about it tomorrow morning.
Tamar's comment speaks for itself. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much, Tamar. And now
I will say proudly that Tamar's last year was not just a year of COVID, but a year of motherhood. So
Mazel tov.
I think the gravitation to community has, let's say, she comes by it honestly.
I mean,
Alex?
a lot of us have definitely noticed, even without new children in the house, even with kids that are a little bit older, I've noticed that in a pretty strong way. Alex?
Well, Mazel Tov, first of all. Second of all, thank you, Bernie, for doing this. Great to see you and Sidra. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Just a couple of observations as questions as I'm looking at this section. So I think one way to think about this is that what you're supposed to do pedagogically with the four sons is some kind of burden on the leader, right? This is tell it to your children. That's one standard. The other standard would be the Ka'ilu that comes later in the Haggadah. Do you help them see themselves as if they have been part of this collective redemption?
Right.
A different question that I wanted to ask you is, do you think about this as a typology, the way you compared it with James, or do you think about it as a piece of rhetoric that is part of legitimizing or teaching a certain view? In other words, it's not a scientific analysis, but a piece of of rhetoric that's designed to convince in a certain way. The one thing I wanted to say about the wise son is he says etchem. He doesn't say otanu.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is some space between where he is and the authority, the parental authority he's asking. It's always been there. But what the wicked son drops out when he's lechem is an interest in testimony and laws, and he drops God out. And then the answers come back in. Actually, God doesn't come in that answer. God comes in the next two answers. So there's also a kind of a question of who's sitting there and who sees what's said to the other. Doesn't, it's not clear that all sons would be present all the time, but it seems as if there's actually a kind of a theater here. There's a kind of a play.
Thank you, Alex. Let's go to Marty for the last question, and then we'll let Bernie finish us off. Marty, you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Great.
I don't think I have my picture, but well, let's see. Maybe you can try. Oh, here I am. Okay, Bernie, I won't take the time to add my praise of your talk. I always learn so much. So I read the Haggadah, say from 10 or 11 to 22, like all the Jewish things I did at that time, indifferently. I came, I behaved, I grew up. And then when I came more to Jewish things in my 60s and then Hillel, I learned much. And the way I came to look at, I wanted to ask you if you could comment on the authorship of these four sons. You talk about them as if they exist in the real world. Well, they were written. They just as the Torah was written by, we have all the analysis of J and E and so forth, and that's a great study. So the way I came to see the Haggadah after I read Friedman's book, Who Wrote the Bible, as a Deuteronomization, like Deuteronomy is another author's view of everything that's been said in the Torah. That's what makes it interesting. It's not a summary by another author. So who wrote these four sons and what were they trying to say? What was he or they trying to say in your view?
Well, this is sort of another way of stating what Alex was asking. Is this a typology or a form of rhetoric that, and I'm not really sure I see a distinction there. I think it's both a typology and a form of rhetoric, and I think it is meant to organize the thinking of the person who leads the Seder regarding how to teach or introduce the study of Torah to the children, to the new members of the community. I plead ignorance with regard to when and how the Haggadah was organized. I know it was organized before medieval times. So there's a long history to the organization of the Haggadah. And I'm certainly, as I said before, I'm not expert on this. I don't really care, to be honest. I'm assuming this is the product of a long process of redaction and addition, and is meant to reflect the ways in which the leaders of the Jewish congregations that constituted the Jewish community in the Eastern European diaspora particularly expected to perpetuate the community. I may be, if you tell me, no, this came from Timbuktu and it was, written in 1945, I will say, boy, that's interesting. I didn't know that. But otherwise, I'm just going to stick with my sort of ignorant, but, impression consistent with the way I think liturgy has evolved over the last millennium. so the real question, which I think Marty's asking and Alex is asking, is like, what's the point of it? What are we supposed to use it for? And I think, having come from a rather Orthodox home and from a rather Orthodox Jewish education, I knew then what it was for. It was in order to initiate me into an Orthodox conception of Torah and mitzvot. And I think that our struggle is, if we have left that organized conception of Torah and mitzvot, then what is the value of this text? And here I think I'm going to reinforce something Marty said sort of en passant, which is, yes, this is a whole way of grasping. This is didactic way in which what is being advanced was advanced. And our question is, can we still feel a sense of affiliation to that advance? If not, not. But if so, can we at least understand the emotional and intellectual climate in which these people operated and why it felt so precious to them to advance what they were advancing? And can we identify with that struggle? You know, I'll just close with this. The nicest thing Sidra ever said to me was, "I love your struggle." To me, that's the greatest kind of love there is. And when I think of these rabbis, I love their struggle, but I sure as hell don't love what they say.
That's a wonderful note to end on. And we can't thank you enough for coming all the way from Jerusalem to talk to us. I think all of our Seder tables will be enriched. And I thank everyone who came today. And I can only say, we love your badness.
I'll try not to disappoint you.
Thank you all, and thank you so much, Bernie. It's really very stimulating and so much to think about. I guess we could stay on for a couple minutes to schmooze, and then
I need to get going.
Okay.
Myself, but I will make Sherry the actual host. Thanks to everyone, especially to Bernie and everyone who has joined us from the distant reaches of the globe. As I've put into the chat a few times, this is on YouTube if you'd like to see it again and read Bernie's wisdom. Please look in the chat and you will find
his wife Sidra did it a month ago.
You will find the link to the YouTube video. And again, you know, a happy Chodesh Tov to everyone. Happy Nissan, and have a wonderful Passover. But hopefully we'll see one another before then. Okay.
Jim, thank you so much. Jim, thank you.
Bye-bye. You're welcome.
I started with Bernie before I decided.
Sherry?
Yes.
Is Bernie still on?
Yes.
Yes.
I guess both of you people are more substantive, I'm more political, as is my job in life, and where I get my not checks anymore. But I was asking another question. I mean, I was proposing another thing. I think, isn't this wonderful about Judaism, that we have these different points of view? In other words, I grew up thinking the Haggadah was part of the Bible. You know, it's not. You know, you said, you know, whenever it was written, it's another viewpoint, and you're taught you should have this other viewpoint. And what a wonderful way of approaching that we get this pluralistic view, you know. And you brought it further, William James, you know, and So do you see it as a wonderful pluralistic addition to the discussion?
Well, as I said to, you know what, come to Jerusalem and ask yourself if this is such a pluralistic group of people. I mean, I feel like the spin which we have put on this tradition has been wonderful. I mean, I wasn't part of worship and study for 35 years for nothing. I mean, I loved it.
Can I just say something?
Sure.
To the intimate group that's still here. I was going to say it to you personally, Bernie, but I'll say it to everybody. Keneged Arba Banim, as it actually mean the word neged, and Shmuel is on, he knows, can mean many things. It can mean opposed to, it can mean vis-a-vis, which is what I think it means here.
Right.
But it is also a rabbinic term that invites the idea of distance. And so I think that there's an invitation there to distance yourself actually from each of the sons as you're struggling with this, whether you are the leader of the Seder or whether you are just a reader. But I think that, you know, we're both invited to imagine ourselves as each of the sons, even if we're daughters. But also there's something about Keneged. When Jews pray vis-a-vis the Temple Mount for 2,000 years, they pray Keneged Beit HaMikdash, and they can be, you know, 3,000 miles away, or as they are today, they can be, you know, a few meters away. You're always Keneged. You're always vis-a-vis. So the distance here is implied in the very term.
Okay, can I quickly respond to this?
Shmuel. Okay, and then I myself have to leave, but if you guys want
Yeah, I do too. I have to give my students an exam in 4 minutes. So.
4 minutes. Okay, so I think we should close now. I'm sorry, Shmuel. Maybe
Well, you can quickly just
you have
say.
time for him? Okay, good. Shmuel, and then we'll close. Okay.
Okay, just quickly relate back to the comments of both Sidra and Bernie. You said, Bernie, you said something about the, in response to my comment about racism, you said it's interesting to observe. And that's my personal dilemma. What's my relation to the whole Seder? What is it to me? Am I an observer, like you suggest, observe it in an academic way and say it's interesting? Am I a participant, or am I leading a Seder? And my role is very different. And my attitude is very different, and not all of them are compatible with my outlook.
Right.
Beautiful. I'm going to be thinking about all these comments during our Seder, and think of how many Seders are going to be talking about you in this talk. And appreciating the Rasha. It's going to be wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yes.
It's really
Thank you, Bernie.
Pleasure. Love to all of you.
Thank you, Bernie.
This
It's great.
is part of our Seder. Just this is the Vorspice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Wonderful.
Thanks.